Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good morning. The Vice Chancellor of Satwa University, my friend Prof. Graham, uh, officers of Sunway University, the Honorable Speaker here, Professor Feng Hsuan from University of Macau, my distinguished colleagues, former Vice Chancellors, especially Tan Sri Anwar Ali. His face quickly has made me nervous actually. Because sometimes I wonder actually he should be the one talking here because he has been in education much longer than me. But it's okay, he's my good friend. He will forgive me for whatever naughty things I say. And distinguished guests. Under the Jeffrey Chia Institute for Southeast Asia, we organize frequent seminars on topics of interest which covers many areas, especially economics, education, and so on. And today we are here to debate and discuss another very interesting topic, which is the issue of leadership and governance. When I set about to formulate this seminar, I thought we shouldn't just be talking about the issues of leadership and governance within Malaysia, but we need to have some ideas or some comparison with those in other countries, especially in the East and the West. And finally, I was able to get two distinguished speakers, one of which is here now, Professor Feng Hsuan, and the other is Professor Alma Harris, who was from the University of London. Both are very senior academics, both are very well-established academics. Both can tell you everything about the university system under the sun. So these are very qualified people to discuss under the Sunway University. And so I look forward to a very stimulating morning today to hear what our distinguished speakers have to say about their own perspective about leadership and governance. And we look forward to questions and answers that can come up with new stimulus for our own country. The whole idea of the Jeffrey Chia Institute is basically to find new ways, new direction, new breakthroughs, in particular to stimulate the education, the higher education, the economy of this country and so on, in moving forward through all these very stiff challenges that we are on now. I'm sure all of you will agree with me that we are, as a nation, currently going through very steep challenges. And not only that, higher education is fast changing, fast growing, difficult to anticipate what may happen in the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years and so on. And on my part, I have actually gathered various expert opinion on how they see education to be developing. And of course, it is my job to propose on how Malaysian universities, in particular public universities in Malaysia, should respond to all these challenges and so on, because it is without doubt that the higher education landscape in 10 years, 20 years from now will be quite different from what we are seeing today. But of course, we have issues to tackle today, and we have the future to look at in the future. So this is generally what the whole seminar today is all about. In Sunway University, I must point out that people here are quite open. We are not necessarily restrained by religion or race and so on. We try to be as open as possible, which going from one private university before, then to the public university, and now landing myself here, I find actually the Sunway environment to be much, much open than whatever systems I've gone through before. Of course, the most challenging system I have been before is at the University of Malaya, of course. And that's why when I was only given 5 years to be Vice Chancellor, I was very happy actually. And I'm of course very happy to be here today because down here you can say anything and people will forgive you. So with that note, it is my pleasure to invite Prof. Feng Hsuan. I must tell you, I've known him for many years. It is interesting that he has been hopping around, and he has been quite some time in Taiwan, some of the Taiwanese top universities. And now he has gone to Macau to become the chief advisor to the rector there, chief strategist and so on. We never have this kind of titles in Malaysia, Prof. So you better tell us exactly what you do and tell us your strategy. Hopefully we can copy from you here. I think that will benefit Sunway University tremendously. So this is a man with vision. This is the man who is supposed to help the president of Macau University to move forward and become a renowned university, perhaps top 100 very, very soon. Is that correct? If they didn't get there, then it's your wrong strategy. So let me welcome Prof. Feng Hsuan. Thank you.
Good morning. I am very grateful that I'm asked to speak before Gulf. As you all know, when Jasmine, Tansiri Jasmine gives his talk, it usually is all-encompassing, and it covers everything under the sun, as he says. And anyone that follows him would have nothing to say. So I'm very happy that I can say before he had a chance to say anything. Otherwise, I will have to come up and just be silent. Yes, I am in Macau now. I'll give you a little bit of background of myself. I was for 20 years what is called a cocoon professor of theoretical physics. In other words, my interests that I exist within the university was the next quantum mechanics that I would be teaching, the next PhD that I will be producing, the next postdoc that I will be advising, and some undergraduates that I work with. And of course, going to conferences in the summer, which is a good life, by the way, as a faculty, as some of you may be aware of. But that was my life. It was a very satisfying life. And suddenly, in 1995, after I published my 200 papers, I realized that the next paper I publish will be 201. Of no great significance, although I'm sure it's not a bad paper. And I was started to think that maybe there's more life than that. And serendipitously, I had a chance and moved into industry for 4 years. I became a vice president for a Fortune 500 company called Science Applications International Corporation. At that time, it was a defense contract company. It has about 60,000 members, of which 25,000 are PhDs. They sell nothing except brains. And so what I learned in that period was that PhD, we're all in a university. We all sort of come to the conclusion that if you don't have a PhD, you cannot be that good. And once you work in industry, I learned something I never learned in the university, and that was quality is not equal to PhD. We had big projects, $100 million projects, and you want to find a team to work on those projects, and you want to make sure that the person you select for the project can do the work, independent of what degrees he or she holds. With that in mind, when I became the vice president for research at the University of Texas, I brought that concept to the University of Texas. It was University of Texas in Dallas because it was a good time, because Dallas was a high-tech town. It was a town where Texas Instrument was, or still is, where Ericsson's North American company headquarters is, where Alcatel's North America headquarters is, where Raytheon, one of the major research centers of Raytheon is, and all the F-16s in the world that's produced there. And yet it didn't have a great university. And so actually to have that university, to allow this concept of taking people of different quality together within the university to build the university, to build the region's economy, was a very important lesson that I learned. After 7 years, I was recruited, as was mentioned, to go to Taiwan. There I observed the two top universities in Taiwan, how they struggle, how Asians look at higher education in a completely different manner than that of the North American ways. How we have ministries of education. I know, United States have the Secretary of Education. One of the good things about the Secretary of Education is that it has no financial resource, and therefore it cannot control the universities. In fact, the Minister of Education of Taiwan once said, "Oh, it's so good to have you to come to Taiwan and help," and so on and so forth. And I say, America education has lots of problems. But one thing you can learn, and I was telling the minister, is that they don't have a Ministry of Education. So in some sense, this whole idea allowed me, being almost 9 years now in Asia, to look at Asia from inside, to think about Asian higher education from its inside as well as from its outside. And I think there's a lot, and I hope that what I will talk about today will give you some sense as to what I have learned. Now, what I have learned, Asia is a big place and a very, very complex place. And it's constantly changing. As you all know, in 2013, Xi Jinping said he wanted to do One Belt, One Road. All of a sudden, universities in Greater China are all under this gun as to what it means. How can education institutions play a role in this seemingly economic effort? Or does it? Anyway, in fact, tomorrow evening I'm giving a public talk on this. So, let me begin. Title of my talk is Philosophical Principle, Leadership and Environment, the Heart, Soul, and Existence of a University. First of all, let me again thank the organizers, in particular my good friend here, for inviting and allowing me this platform to talk about a truly profound subject confronting Asia Pacific today. As I've said often, I grew up in Singapore. But when I left Singapore for the United States, I don't know whether you would believe this, I was holding a Malaysian passport. That's because Singapore was part of Malaysia at that time. I was a very, very young high school kid. So Malaysia's well-being is very dear to my heart. In this respect, I cannot think of another important component of Malaysia's society than its education. As I mentioned in my abstract, which some of you have read, I will discuss three interrelated aspects of challenges facing higher education today in Asia Pacific. First, I will touch on the philosophical principle. To me, this is really the upstream of upstream challenges. And the second, I will talk about the issue of leadership. And finally, I will discuss the optimum environment to nurture the educational mission of a university. So the first one, philosophical principle. I think everyone in this audience would agree with me that there is no perfect philosophical principle of higher education. But if there is one sentence, next slide. There's one sentence. Oh, I should do it myself? Oh, sorry. Oh, I don't know how many of you use WeChat. If you use WeChat, you can scan it in right now. And then by the end of the lecture, you will be my friend. Okay? This is how amazing WeChat is. In the last 10 lectures I gave, all across Greater China and Taiwan, I've gained over 1,500 friends. And this WeChat is more powerful than Facebook. WeChat is something that you can penetrate and form virtual friends, virtual community very, very quickly. Anyway, if you have it, please send me a message. Make sure on top you say, I am from Sunway. Okay? Okay. So, I think that if there is one sentence which could come closest to being perfect, it will be the immortal words of Charles Eliot, whom I was told was a cousin, or I don't know how many of you, is a cousin of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot, of course, was the great American poet. Eliot was president of Harvard University for 4 decades, from 1869 to 1909, 40 years. So I see that the vice chancellor of Sunway here, if he's going to do anything at all, he should be here for 40 years. Okay. Unquestionably, Eliot's greatest contribution to education, if not to humanity, is, quote unquote, to turn Harvard into Harvard. Just before he assumed the presidency, Eliot wrote in the Atlantic Monthly, a very well-known journal, which still exists today, what I consider to be the ultimate philosophical principle of a university. And here it says, a university in any worthy sense of the term must grow from seed. It cannot be transplanted from England or Germany in full leaf and bearing. When the American university appears, it will not be a copy of foreign institutions or a hotbed plant, but the slow and natural outgrowth of American social and political habits. The American college is an institution without a parallel. The American university will be equally original. Now, in my nearly 16 years of academic administration, few university presidents' speeches were as heart-throbbing and mesmerizing as this one. Now, needless to say that during the past 12 years, these words of Eliot reverberated in my head. I have dissected these few immortal words, with great care and precision since 2004, after I first learned it from reading the then president of Yale University, Richard Levin's 钓鱼台 keynote lecture of 2004 in Beijing. Now, there are 2 fundamental points about Eliot's comment. First, for almost a decade since then, in many of my speeches, I have quoted again and again that I thought what Eliot said was that the ultimate aim of any university's philosophical principle should not and must not merely copy some known successful model or models. Essentially, what Eliot said was that a university must have its own unique characteristics, which sometimes that is philosophically called a soul, a university's soul. It is not something one can clone other model or models easily or at all. The best example of non-clone principle I can think of is a comparison of two famous technical institutions in the United States: California Institute of Technology, Caltech, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Next slide. Oh, sorry. Both Caltech and MIT are world-renowned. In today's frenzy world of ranking, global ranking, both inevitably will be two of the top-ranked institutions, but the two cannot be more different in their philosophical principles. Now, why do I say that? Well, let's look at it. With nearly $700 million or $0.7 billion of research funding, 1,000 faculty members, 12,000 students, 20,000 postdocs and researchers, MIT is massive and an economic driving force for Greater Boston and Massachusetts. Beyond that, it is worth underscoring that MIT is not merely a top-notch institution, it is literally dotting the globe with MIT International Science and Technology initiatives called MISTI. Within MISTI, there are now the MIT Singapore program, MIT China program, MIT Korea program, MIT Japan programs, Mexico program. Of course, there's also the Cambridge MIT Institute. Essentially, MIT leverages its global brand name. MIT is more than an education, it's a brand. MIT is dotting the world. I think I'm not exaggerating to say that it is the envy of the world, even in as far a place as Singapore or Kuala Lumpur. Caltech, on the other hand, is almost the antithesis of MIT. With only $300 million of research funding, a small faculty of 300, a small number of students, which they have maintained. This 300, by the way, is a number which they more or less have maintained from the day of its inception, about 100 years ago. You know, Caltech is a very interesting place. When a Caltech faculty dies or leaves, the university does not say that, oh, that department or that program will be replaced by someone of that field. They ask the following question: what is the most exciting field at that moment, and who is the best person in that field that we can recruit? No universities in the world could do that. And it only has 2,000 students, of which less than 1,000 are undergraduates. So it does not have a global brand name, nor does it intend to dot the globe with Caltech. People in Southern California and beyond certainly are aware of Caltech's reputation and excellence, but no one would think that it is a massive economic locomotive. So cast in today's Asia mentality, where greatness is measured by the magnitude, big universities, they all want to be big. The biggest universities in China is called Jilin University. Jilin University has 90,000 students today. How did they do that? Well, they amalgamated every university and colleges in Changchun. And the joke about Jilin University is that the beautiful city of Changchun is within the campus of Jilin University. Okay. You would think that Caltech, using this Asian mentality, Caltech would want to emulate MIT's global successful model. In fact, the outcome is the opposite. It is worth noting that, quote, keeping a small and truly outstanding faculty, unquote, for Caltech was the philosophical principle at its inception and is adamantly observed today, nearly a century later. So a few years ago, I had a meeting with the then Caltech president, Jean-Louis Chameau, who is now the president of KAUST. I asked him a somewhat impertinent question. I said, Caltech is a small institution with 300 faculty members, a few $100 million of research expenditure. yet it is willing and able to take on the administration of Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a multi-billion NASA operation. How did you do it? He answered succinctly to me that, and I quote, Caltech will forever be small, with truly outstanding faculty and students. Yes, we were, we are, and we will be small, but we do not think small. In a few words, President Shamal expressed succinctly a deep philosophical principle of Caltech to me. Philosophical principle. So a university, whether it be in Pasadena or Kuala Lumpur, must have a palpable and maybe to the outsiders a sense of elusive soul. The comparison of MIT and Caltech tells me that these two institutions have each found and adhere to their respective and totally different souls. Caltech did not and will not become a clone of MIT, nor MIT of Caltech. In reality, I truly believe that because Caltech and MIT are both deeply rooted in their own philosophical principles, their enormous differences have richly contributed to the intellectual robustness of the United States than if they were a clone of one another. I think the lesson of Caltech and MIT is a profound one. It is not because they are institutions which are worshipped by the world. It is because they adhere to a well-thought-through philosophical principle. Their diversity in style, in my opinion, is even more important for the United States than the fact that they are world-class institutions. This is a profound lesson that Asian universities should and need to learn. It is in this sense that I believe that every Asian university needs to find its unique soul, without which it will be a long road for Asian universities to become truly world-class. Second point, recently I realized I have embarrassingly missed another even more important nuance of Eliot's comment. Well, what I have said about my understanding regarding not cloning is still true. Only after I came to Asia almost 9 years ago, in fact 9 years ago now, I began to gain a deeper understanding of how Asian universities operate. It made me sluggishly shifting my attention to some other words in Eliot's quotation, which are the slow and natural outgrowth of American social and political habits. I remember asking myself on several occasions, quite recently, the following question. Why did Eliot talk about social and political habits, when whatever he uttered before these words in the quotation were already, or at least they seem to be, all-encompassing about nature of university at that time? Well, when Eliot made that comment, it was sometime in 1868 or 1869. As we all know, the North-South Civil War ended in 1865. By 1868 or 1869, you all know that the Morrill Act of 1862, which initiated land-grant universities, such as UC Berkeley, Wisconsin, Michigan, and so on, Texas A&M, were all in full swing. This means that the United States was entering an era of great transformation. The country's social structure and economy were entering the so-called agriculture and mechanical era. Yet, until Eliot came on board, the classical curricula of Harvard University, controlled by clergymen, seemed to have little or no relevance to the country. Understanding these historical background, it dawned on me that what Eliot was implying that a university simply cannot exist in isolation to everything around it. What that everything was the quote-unquote social and political habits. I'm confident that these 4 words, social and political habits, were carefully chosen by Eliot to symbolize the importance of a university's understanding of its social environment and the existing political system of the country it belongs to. I think in today's context, that is even more important for Asia, because a high percentage of Asian universities are public in nature, unlike Harvard or Sunway here in Kuala Lumpur. Again, at that moment of the United States, it just fought a very bloody war, where Lincoln at Gettysburg Address pronounced that all men are created equal. This indeed was a tall order for society. And as a university, in Eliot's view, Harvard University must not only adhere to this social principle, but it must also take on the responsibility to advance it. Also, Eliot was well aware that the political system which the United States evolved into since its independence of 1776 was profoundly different from England in particular, European nations in general. Once again, as a university, Harvard University, in Eliot's view, should not and cannot be ignorant of the political structure. Indeed, it must join the ranks of all other human institutions or organizations in the nation to advance it as well. I am quite sure that Eliot would feel that it would be a failure of education if the university allows students to go through a university education without acquiring a deep understanding of strengths and weaknesses of the political system of the nation they belong to. I think, in his mind, the philosophical principle of any university, and Harvard cannot be an exception, must take on the assumption that many of its graduates will someday be national leaders. Having such a philosophical principle not only will benefit the universities, it could benefit the nation and maybe humanity in general. What I have discussed so far is applicable not only for Harvard University at Eliot's days, it is applicable for Harvard today, it is also applicable for universities in general, and Malaysia should not be an exception. For Malaysia, I think the immortal words of the father of the nation, Tunku Abdul Rahman, probably best describe the social and political habits of the nation. Tunku said that we must each always think first of Malaysia, of the national need and least of ourselves. Everyone must try to help and see that the people are one-minded with loyalty and one aim to make Malaysia, the land we love, a happy abode for all of us. If we all do this, then we can guarantee liberty, security, prosperity, and happiness for the future. These were elegant words from someone who foresaw Malaysia's grand destiny as an important, maybe even pivotal nation in this part of the world. It was even obvious that Malaysia was one of the few nations in the world in its inception days and with subsequent ups and downs is today multiracially harmonious and multiculturally enhancing. For sure, the superb Malaysian cuisine can only be found in this country. Furthermore, cast in today's landscape where globalization is a necessity and not a luxury, such a national composure of multiplicity is definitely in its enormous strength and not its weakness. With that in mind, how could the philosophical principle of higher education institutions in Malaysia not adhere to the slow and natural outgrowth of Malaysian social and political habits as expounded by Tunku Abdul Rahman? Now, the next topic I'd like to discuss is about leadership. In 2005, when the world of higher education was not quite ready for the onslaught of global rankings, I had the honor of attending the first international conference on world-class universities in Shanghai Jiao Tong University. This is way before QS or THE or all that stuff. There I gave a talk with the title, World Universities Ranking Generic and Intangible Features of Universities. So let me read you a passage in that speech which is relevant for today's discussion. Here I quote, "I cannot help but to mention at this point a Chinese university called Peking University, PKU. One of the first presidents of PKU was a man whom I believe is not well known in the West, although he should be. His name is Cai Yuanpei. I think that just as Eliot of Harvard, PKU would not be what it is today if it did not have Cai at the helm in its beginning. Indeed, with Cai's leadership, PKU became not just the soul of Chinese universities community, but in fact the soul of Chinese history and culture of the 20th century. So how do we measure the intangible impact of PKU on China with the effort of Baihua, or modern Chinese language movement, the May 4th movement, and so on and so forth? Is it even logical to consider that PKU is not a world-class university when it has profoundly impacted China with nearly quarter humanity and for a century? With that as an example, I then stated my fundamental belief what a university president should be. And here I said, the person can and will have profound impact on a university's demeanor. Indeed, the president of a university is its window for the world. The intellectual depth, elegance, vision, and most of all, courage of a president are direct reflections of the heart, soul, and quality of his or her university. Throughout history, great universities were always propelled by great presidents. With that as preamble, it is or should be transparent that the selection of president and the terms he and she can serve becomes one of the most critical tasks of a university. University is, in no ifs or buts, an educational establishment. Therefore, the president must first and foremost be deeply interested in education and, to a lesser extent, be a scholar. Now, I should emphasize that he or she should have a profound understanding of the importance of scholarship, but he or she needs not be a scholastic giant. I should also emphasize that he or she must have sufficient intellectual bandwidth under his or her belt. Finally, he or she must regard endowing students with wisdom and not just technical skills to be the supreme objective of the university. I know that in Asia there's a tendency to select presidents based on scholarship measured by the accolades he or she has received. That, I believe, is a fundamental flaw. Of all the Nobel laureates I know well, for example, there is only one person whom I think I would feel comfortable to see him to become the leader of a university. I think the disastrous example of KAIST, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, in the early part of the 21st century, who selected a Nobel laureate to be the president, tells all. I recall someone once also made the comment that Stanford University is a multi-billion business. And it is. University is also a human institution that needs many, many millions and probably billions of ringgits or dollars or renminbi to operate annually. Therefore, the president must have a chief executive officer mindset and is given the complete freedom to select a crackerjack team to run his or her operation from students' affairs to academic affairs to financial affairs to buildings and grounds affairs, and nowadays it is more and more important global affairs. When I joined the University of Texas at Dallas as the vice president for research, the sentence I adored in my contract was, here I quote, "You serve at the pleasure of the president." Is there an optimum manner to select a president? The answer is probably there's no such selection which could be a panacea. However, given the above discussion, there are a few conditions which I believe must be fulfilled in selecting such an individual. First, I have emphasized strongly, politics must be kept out of selection as much as possible. In my speech at Sunway last year, I said, higher education is the pulse of a nation. When it is strong, so is the nation. When it is weak, so is the nation. If there is one national issue which should be absolutely above politics, it should and must be education. I deeply believe it then. I still deeply believe it now. Since presidents of Chinese universities are entirely appointed by the government, that procedure, good or bad, is outside of this discussion. For public universities, I think the government representatives in the selection committee must be kept well below 50%, well below, so that the government does not have a final say in it. There should be no government representatives at all if the university is private. Finally, when the decision is made by the selection committee, it should be final. The government cannot veto those decisions. Secondly, it is inevitable that some faculty members will be on the selection committee. This is both positive and negative. Positive because faculty in general are loyal to the institution. After all, they build their careers there. Negative because, in general, they do not have the vaguest idea how to run a university. It must be made clear that these faculty members must declare openly before accepting the membership on the selection committee that they will not and must not accept any administration of positions directly or indirectly when the new president is selected. That, I think, constitutes a clear violation of the conflict of interest. In Taiwan, I've seen such conflict of interest violations too often. Third, as I have mentioned, the president should be selected for his or her deep intellectual ambience, his or her extensive administrative experience, and last but not least, his or her human connectivity. To this end, I think having finite terms for a president is a mistake. It was clear that if Charles Eliot of Harvard University, who served for 40 years, Richard Levin of Yale, who served for 20 years, and Henry Yang of UC Santa Barbara, who served for 22 years, and by the way, still going strong. By the way, UC Santa Barbara, I don't know how many of you know, since Henry Yang came on board as president, or chancellor they call it, he has 6 of his faculties winning the Nobel Prize. The transformation of their respective universities under their leadership would in all likelihood not happen. You need time. You need time for a good president to really do something good for the institution. Fourth, in Asia Pacific, there's a great deal of discussion about selecting a president from a global pool. Personally, I think that is a great idea. Bringing in a person whose modus operandi is fundamentally different from the local mindset could jumpstart complacency. However, I have one however, a big one. I have one serious caveat. When an Asian university selects an outstanding candidate from the West as its leader, that person better have a profound comprehension, or at least profound interest, of the Asian culture and ways and means. In recent years, top US universities have selected Asians as presidents. Great universities such as Carnegie Mellon, whose president is Subra Suresh. The University of California, San Diego, whose chancellor is Pradeep Khosla. And, as I mentioned earlier, UC Santa Barbara, whose chancellor is Henry Yang. Suresh, Khosla, and Yang were products of Asian universities. If they showed no inherent interest in American culture and ways and means, do you honestly believe that they would be selected as leaders of these great institutions? Even if they were selected, would they have any chance to be successful? So the last thing is the optimum environment to nurture education mission of a university. Now comes the grand finale. What is the optimum environment to nurture the education mission of a university? Well, what is the educational mission of a university? As I said already, it is to allow students to gain wisdom beyond some technical skills. In this sense, the optimum environment needs to be one in which students must be inquisitive. Curiosity kills the cat. I was once asked a good friend in Israel why Israeli universities are considered as outstanding. His answer floored me. He said, because in Israel, it is an accepted norm that there are no questions which cannot be asked and no issues which cannot be debated. Is this form of inquisitiveness universally true? I suspect in all likelihood the Israeli propensity towards a complete openness is more an exception than a norm. Frankly, I do not know of any Asia-Pacific university president in today's environment could utter the same words as my Israeli friends. Indeed, even in as open a nation as the United States claims to be, while the Constitution guarantees freedom of speech, political correctness often disallows it. I'm wondering whether this is why Eliot, who foresaw the intricate relations between society and higher education and said that American university must adhere to the social and political habits of the nation. So, all this comes back to the fundamental phrase of Charles Eliot, namely the slow and natural outgrowth of American social and political habits. The environment of an Asian university must be slow and natural outgrowth of Asian society, social and political habits. To go completely against Asian habits would be disastrous. The best thing that could happen would be that the university's growth could in turn influence the growth of the society to become more and more open. Indeed, if the university is achieving excellence, presumably the society will as well. Ultimately, the society surrounding the university must profoundly trust the university to be its best supporter and partner. And in turn, the university must trust the society that it intends to see excellence coming out of the university, because that is clearly good for everyone. Finally, as I have emphasized from the start, a university is a human organization whose mission, and some would say only mission, is to provide wisdom beyond the skills it bestowed on students. That wisdom is what makes a university unique among all forms of human institutions. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, I can honestly say that all other forms of human institutions come and go. Universities which promote knowledge and turn them into wisdom are the only ones that can and will survive, because without it, the nation means nothing. Let me end by telling a very profound dialogue between a United States Senator John Pastore and Dr. Robert Wilson. That's Wilson and that's Pastore. Dr. Wilson was the director of Fermi National Laboratory. Senator Pastore, who's on the Armed Services Committee of the Senate, asked Dr. Wilson, will the accelerator built in Fermi National Laboratory has anything to do with national defense? Dr. Wilson answered in no uncertain terms, only from a long-range point of view of a developing technology. Otherwise, it has to do with, are we good painters, good sculptors, good poets? I mean, all the things that we really venerate and honor in our country and are patriotic about. In that sense, this new knowledge has all to do with the honor and country, but it has nothing to do directly with defending our country, except to help make it worth defending. Thank you. Oh, sure.
Thank
No. Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. Feng Dashuan, for that very enlightening talk. Actually, only today I learned a lot more about the American system than in the last 33 years. You know? So thank you for coming to KL and telling us all this, but also partly because he has been in the American system, isn't it? You know? I learned a few interesting things today, which I like your talk. The first thing you say,
What things you like?
I will tell you what are the things that I like. First of all, the president of university should not be the best academic, isn't it? And I'm not the best. I'm happy with that. He must be good in administrative ability. Well, I suppose I am, you know. 3 Asians got to become the presidents of the American universities, right? Well, I may have a chance, but I'm not looking forward to it anymore. I'm already retired. But the great thing you have said also is this, that whoever wants to become president must understand the political, the racial, the cultural background of the society you are operating on, you know. You cannot be doing it outside of that. This is a very important point. So these are recipes for becoming a president that is effective and long-lasting, you know. Of course, in my own slide, I will be discussing this subject matter because what I want to propose today is that Harvard, MIT, Princeton, you name it, may not exist in 100 years from now, you know. And I want to tell you why I think this may be the case in 100 years' time. So we can revere Eliot today, but not in 10 or 20 years' time. Certainly, no one in Malaysia will be able to do what Eliot has done, which is to be a president for 40 years. The best possible person who probably could have done that was Uncle Aziz, but he was only for 19 years. And after Uncle Aziz in the University of Malaya, nobody else comes near that anymore. So I think that is very, very difficult. In fact, the chances of failing as a vice chancellor is even greater now than ever before, actually. You know? But I will talk about that much later. Let us hear some questions for Prof. Feng. Please ask as you wish. Prof, please.
Before you ask, please tell me who you are and what's your background, so I will get to know you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Dr. Amin. I was with the university before, now retired retired professor. I'm doing training, freelancing. I like what you have said that, or comments say that to be university president, you not have to be the best in academic. That I agree in principle. But one thing, especially in Asia universities, we have to be friendly with whoever gives us the money. Otherwise, we cannot proceed, even we have good ideas and so on. So the president must be the man who is friendly with, in Malaysia we call it the minister. If he's friendly with the minister, I think if he got his ideas, he can talk freely and he will probably be successful. If you have very good ideas and you are not friendly with the minister, from my experience, you won't get what you want. Somebody else will get it. So that's my comment. I'd like to hear other comments as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very profound comment. There's an old saying, a university obviously needs money. There's a very famous saying is that vision without funding is hallucination. But I have to say that I may take a somewhat different view from you regarding friendship with ministers. When I was in Taiwan for 7 years, I saw 7 ministers of education come and go. When the ministers change so often, I'm not so sure I want to be good friends with any one of them. But I think on a bigger scale, what you're saying is not, I don't think you're saying that you should be friendly to that particular minister. But what you're really saying is that the university must be able to have the correct and proper dialogue with the funding agencies, whoever their funding agencies is. In Malaysia, you have different types of funding agencies and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, the president, or vice chancellor as you call it, must be able to articulate as succinctly, as properly and eloquently the purpose of his or her university. Not just you go and beg for money. That you can eloquently say what the money is for so that the nation will become better because of that money. And I think those are important comments, whether it's in Malaysia or Taiwan or China or Macau or anywhere else. But at the same time, university must also take on the responsibility, and maybe I'm treading on very thin ice here, of the responsibility to educate the government. The government needs as much education as the students. And in fact, maybe more so, because the government will move the nation in directions that students cannot. And so, how does a university educate the government? Well, you don't go by setting up classes like this and hoping that the prime minister sits there in the class. What you want to do is to have the leader of the university, and I think you have a very good one here, the eloquence of the university can be described in the best possible terms and over and over and over again. Only then that I believe that the university not only fulfills its education mission, but the university also fulfills its social responsibility. I think that that part of the university we tend to forget. We only think in terms of educating the students, and there's 99% of the time is to educate the students. But it is also an important part of the society. Imagine Malaysia without higher education institutions. Zero. What will Malaysia be like? It will be frightening, I can assure you. Not only frightening, it will be simply downright scary. Because nobody will be able to say anything that is reasonable or understandable. So I think you brought up a very good point. Universities and the society, you know, I'm really impressed by Eliot's comment of social and political habits. Nation has social and political habits. I have not seen anyone said in those 4 words since. But if we forget the social and political habits, we're in a deep, deep problem. Thank you. Again, please announce who you are. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alvin Ang. I was a fellow at Khazanah National, a sovereign wealth fund. And right now I work in a consultancy that tries to educate senior government officials. I would love that you can unpack for us briefly Eliot's comments on seed.
On
He
what?
said seed. The university grows from seed,
Right.
and a good seed. In your experience, both in the U.S. as well as in Asia, you have seen a broad array of universities. What is seed for you? What is good seed, especially in Asia? And what are the characteristics, DNA characteristics in the seed that you have seen can doom an institution into lifelong mediocrity?
Lifelong what?
Mediocrity.
Mediocrity. Thank you. You know, I've given a lot of thought about what Eliot meant by seed. In the end, I think what Eliot meant, and I think it applies to Asian universities too, is our deep understanding and respect of our own culture. If we don't deeply understand or respect our own culture, then we are standing on very thin ice. And culture is a complex matter. The culture of China is very different from the culture of Malaysia. It's very different from the culture of the Islamic world. But I believe very deeply that if we just clone a foreign university, bring in their vision and transplant it in Asian soil, in the long run, the students that we produce will be very confused. Who do they talk to? How do they understand their own people if the university does not try to bring in a cultural sense of the region? So I think that's probably the most important thing. You know, I mentioned earlier, I dropped a line earlier, China now wants to promote the so-called One Belt, One Road. You know, as soon as you talk about One Belt, One Road, you start thinking about the ancient Silk Road. Well, if you think about the ancient Silk Road, by the way, it's very interesting. In the Song Dynasty, in the 1100s, in a city called Kaifeng in China, in Henan province, there were 8,000 Jews. In fact, it was a very vibrant Jews. The Chinese couldn't tell the difference between Jews and Muslims, so they called them blue hat Muslims, because their yarmulke is in blue color. Where did it come from? They came from the Silk Road. But if you think about history in the last 1,000 years, the Silk Road meant people from the West coming to Asia, coming to China, and hardly ever Chinese going to the West. And so the Chinese look at themselves. You know, the word China means 中国. 中 means center. I look at myself. I look inwards. So the ancient Silk Road was an organic growth. But the modern One Belt, One Road is a Chinese concoction, if you like, or creation. And when the Chinese wanted that, they will have to think in a completely different way than they have for 1,000 years. They will have to try to understand other people. When I say culture for yourself, it doesn't mean that you want to ignore everyone else. It means you need to understand other people as well. For example, of the 3,500 Chinese universities today, only 3 universities in China engage in South Asia research, and on very small scale. In other words, the Chinese don't understand the Indians whatsoever. And by the way, the same with Indians not understanding Chinese. So the idea that we have to think deeply about our own culture and build universities along that is not to block out other people, but to use a deep understanding of yourself to understand other people very well. My good friend, who was the president of University of Toronto, David Naylor, has a very good line. He said he wished that all students from the University of Toronto, all Canadian students from the University of Toronto, can understand other people's culture with other people, understand other people's challenges with other people's culture. So, you ask a brilliant question, what is the seed? Seed is a very complex thing, and it gets more complex than the days of Eliot mentioned 100 years ago.
Thank you. I used to be in public service for many years.
Who
But-
are you?
Muhammad Dahan.
Yeah.
Okay. But I still stay close with ministries, especially the higher education ministry. The situation today with public university vice chancellors, they are facing very tough times because of budget cuts. They used to get very good funding before from government, but because of austerity drive cutting across all ministries, they are now told to look for outside funds and not just rely on government funds. Public university vice chancellors are not like private university vice chancellors or presidents who are used to living in an environment where you can charge fees as high as you want or what the market can take, which should be the main source of income. But with public universities, they are told the fees must be kept low for accessibility. So they are thinking of consultancies and services to the public, especially to industry. But Malaysian industry, the big companies, they have their own research team, so they don't really interact with the universities, and therefore that source of income is not really that big. So I pity the public vice chancellors today who are squeezed in by the constraint of you can't raise the fees, and then you can't really look for funding, and then there are not many philanthropists like in America, because industry here has not been big enough as in America to create so many philanthropies and their endowments. So what advice would you give to public university presidents or vice chancellors in trying to survive within this dilemma or squeeze that they faced today? Because that affects their governance,
Absolutely. First of all, the public universities challenges that you mentioned, cutting back in funding and so on, is not unique to Malaysia. Okay? It's true in many, many, many countries. I can tell you that great universities as the University of Michigan today, the annual funding from the state of Michigan to its operating budget is 9%. Okay? 91%, University of Michigan will have to find their own ways to survive. So this is not just a Malaysian issue, it's a global issue. Even in China, by the way, while we hear about great universities such as Tsinghua and Beida, Tsinghua is now reaching 1.9 billion US dollars a year in funding. But of the 3,500 universities, most are under enormous economic stress. The ultimate issue, I think, is a complex one. How to operate public universities that is good for the public. Private institutions such as Sunway probably has its own way of operation. Now, I'm sure even public universities such as those in Malaysia, not all may be as well off as Sunway. That will depend on who's behind it and so on. So I think that private universities have the same problem. The problem with higher education is that it needs two ingredients for every nation: leadership and strategy. And it's not just temporary leadership and temporary strategy, but long-term leadership and strategy. I cannot comment on Malaysia because I don't know enough about Malaysia's leadership or strategy, but I can comment on Taiwan's. Taiwan's higher education has no leadership and no strategy. Okay? In 1980, Taiwan has 14 universities. Today, it has 163. How did that happen? Well, that happened because every political person in the Taiwan's legislature wanted a university in his or her hometown. I'm sure you can think about that in many other countries, maybe even in Malaysia. And those guys couldn't give a damn whether that's good for the nation or not, because he or she is looking for the votes the next round. And so this explosion of universities, coupled with Taiwan's enormous downturn of birth rate. I don't know whether we have any Koreans here. Koreans like to claim to be number one in many things. So when I went to Korea once and I told them that, Taiwan's birth rate is the lowest in the world, the guy said, no. Korea's number one. We're lower. Taiwan is so low, I can tell you, children's hospitals are closing. Kindergarten classes are closing. Kindergarten teachers cannot find jobs. So the nation simply, now, is it all of a sudden they realize, oh boy, we have a population problem? No. They knew this in 1980 just by looking at the demographics, that these problems will be there, but nobody cared. So education is a long term that requires leadership and strategy. I give you one best example of leadership and strategy. I wrote an article comparing California's higher education with that of Texas. You all know California has 3 layers of systems. The University of California, of 10 universities, research universities, including Berkeley's and so on, and Cal State universities, and the community colleges. Do you know how that came about? The Cal State universities allow only master's degrees, the highest. That's because in 1970, the governor of California, Harold Brown, the current governor's father, and the chancellor of the University of California, Clark Kerr, withstood all social and political and educational pressure imposed on California a higher education roadmap which defined these 3 levels. They put their political strength and educational strength as leadership and then wrote this roadmap as the strategy. And of course, you see today what happened. And Texas, on the other hand, with no strategy and no leadership, has 6 systems. The most well-known, of course, is the University of Texas system. I tell you what is the problem there. The best university in that system would be UT Austin. Some of you probably know that. The worst one would be UT El Paso. Now, how do I measure good and bad? In US, high school kids entering these universities have to take the so-called SATs. The SAT score, maximum 1,600, at least a few years ago. 1,600. To enter the University of Texas at Austin is about 1,350, which is very, very good for state universities. To enter UT's El Paso is 800. Now, what is 800? How bad is 800? Well, if you sign your name on the examination, you get 700. So you're pitching universities with different missions and different reasons and so on. Together, you have nothing but chaos. And so higher education in Malaysia, I'm sure, just like higher education in Taiwan and higher education in China, needs to take a long-term, strategic, with courageous political decisions. Solving one university's financial problem at a time is not the answer. You need a very long-term discussion and people who are willing to stick their neck out just like Clark Kerr and Harold Brown, who did. Imagine at that time a Cal State University president say, "What? I'm not allowed to do PhD?" Can you imagine the fights that he will do? But in the end, they push it through because they realize that is the best thing that can happen to California. Now, are there still arguments nowadays? Plenty. But by and large, we all know that California higher education is probably the most successful one in all the states in the United States. So I said, I wrote an article, unfortunately it's in Chinese. I said that 2 things every country needs to think about, and very, very clearly: education, leadership and strategy. Long-term leadership and strategy. And put the political muscle behind it. If you're not willing to put the political muscle behind it, you will end up like Taiwan. 20 universities at one point, boom, 160. Now without students, universities are scrambling to close. So, anyway, I'm not sure I answered your question, but I give you what I thought.
Thank you very much okay, this is the last one. Okay.
Right. Dominic Fu, University of Nottingham. I'm a professor at chemical engineering.
Here?
Yes, and UK and Malaysia. I would like to make 2 comments or remarks related to what Professor Gauts and Professor Feng has mentioned. Number 1, when I entered university undergraduate in 1996, 20 years ago, we had 10 universities back then. In my chemical engineering, we had 4 departments of chemical engineering. 20 years after, I'm a professor, And we have recent statistics shows that we have more than 70 universities in this country. And I have, in chemical engineering, which I lecture, we have 23 university departments that offer this program. It's a good growth, but when you look at it carefully, we are actually following Taiwan very closely. The country has started to look at the growing, what do you call it, aging problem the last couple of years. Now, I don't know if we are going to open more universities, but looking at 70s, virtually everybody can go to universities. As long as you're not too bad, you have some money, then you can go to universities nowadays. Reason why we have so many universities, because lots of professors want to be the vice chancellor. A lot of college universities. Yeah, well, a lot of college university which we started on back then, maybe 10, 15 years ago, which were supposed to train not people as engineers, but at the supervisory role, nowadays all become universities. It's exactly the same thing in Taiwan. They promoted all the polytechnics to be universities in Taiwan. The same thing happening in Malaysia. Now, that's the first problem. If we are going to grow more, by the way, our population is about the same as Taiwan. We'll see how it goes later. Now, second problem, in Malaysia, Professor Gauts mentioned that the longest serving vice chancellor was Professor Engku Engku Aziz in University of Malaya. After Engku Aziz, no one served that long, not more than 19 years. Reasons well, depends on each university, but for public universities, because the vice chancellor is appointed by the minister, so you have to be somehow related or connected or known to the minister before he or she will appoint you. In the private universities, because of financial constraint and pressure, okay, it's a big pressure to be sustainable in terms of financially. So most vice chancellor wouldn't want to be in the position for too long because of stress. And second thing, I think we don't have many universities with long-term visions and strategies in order for the country to grow. Put it this way, one of the universities recently, I think it's just nearby, recently hired a professor from UK, and he want to transform the university to be the top 50 of under 50 years in Asia. Well, it's a good thing, but we need more like this. The only thing is that what I heard from the recent news was that they are trying to cut down 20% of the staff in the university. Reason is because they are not doing research. So by firing 20% of the staff in that university, you'll be able to hire more professors to boost research in the university. So this happens in one of your neighbor university here. So I don't think it's a good thing, but this is how they do things. All right, I would like to hear from your comments. Thank you.
I'm not sure I have any comments to this complete. I think I said already, it needs, I think for a university, your last comment, just aiming to be the top 50 of the under 50 seems a little short-sighted. I think that in the end, we all have to ask ourselves, why do we have universities at all? Are universities education for everyone, or what sort of university education for everyone? And should all universities be research universities? Or what do we mean by research universities? We have all developed, it's actually quite remarkable. 21st century changed higher education a lot by a few organizations. One of them is called QS. One of them is called THE. And one of them is called Shanghai Jiao Tong. These organizations all set up different sandboxes and force people to play in those sandboxes. especially true for Asians. You know, QS is a money-making organization. They're not shy about going around asking money so that they help you to boost your ranking. I think this is not even a secret anymore. And what is remarkable is that they found their market in Asia. They just have no market in North America and relatively market in Europe. Asia, Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Taiwan, and China, Hong Kong, that's their market. They also have a large, QS has a large component sitting in Singapore. Now, why not in Washington, D.C.? Well, because the guy would have nothing to do in Washington, D.C. and plenty to do in Singapore. So I think that we have, in some sense, distorted our vision of what education is. We all want to be ranked high, not knowing what highly ranked means. You know, I have to admit that I walk into two universities in Beijing, Peking University and Tsinghua University. Tsinghua is ranked higher than Beijing. But the sense of intellectual ambience you get from Beijing University is so much deeper than Tsinghua. And why is that? Well, it's not because Peking University president is not aware of ranking. It's just the 100 years of becoming China's spiritual soul is embedded in this university despite all the political ups and downs in the last 100 years. It did not somehow, that affected Peking University far less than Tsinghua University. So to me, again, in the end, is you look a student in the eye and you ask yourself, after his 4 years in that university, has he changed or she changed? And if he or she hasn't changed, you know, in the Chinese system, you have senior high 1 and senior high 2 and senior high 3 before entering university. And I kept on telling them, don't think of university as a senior high 4, senior high 5, and senior high 6, and senior high 7. That 4 years needs to transform your life. If you haven't done that, it doesn't matter whether you study chemical engineering or English literature or Chinese literature. If those 4 years all the students were become a reasonably good chemical engineer, then your education has failed him. So I think that we Asians need to you know, 9 years ago when I came to Asia, I understood very little about Asian education because I thought, gosh, you know, looking at all the robust growth in Malaysia, in Singapore, and Taiwan, and China, and so on, so-called 100 flowers is booming. Then I so slowly begin to realize that we are missing teaching or influencing our students in a way that they can be useful and constructive citizens, not only for Asia, but the world. So this is a complex issue. I think we need more than just 3 hours of discussion. But I think that, you know, I'm amazed by what Sunway is doing every year. Last year we had one company. This year already I sense that it's already in deeper sense. So thank you for the question.